our last speaker, Mr. Paul Ford, a writer that I've read for a long time, and I think a really perfect way to close this day. He really defines what it means to bring design and technology together in his writing. We do book reports at Google Design, and when we did a book report for What is Code, we read and discussed it together, and we realized that Paul could communicate something in a way that almost none of the rest of us could. So we really felt like we should give him the floor to close us down today. And his whole body of writing is really about kind of changing nature of work in the digital age. So today he'll be focusing on a really important aspect of that work that's often misunderstood. To enlighten us on the complexities of talent, please welcome Mr. Paul Ford. Thank you.
Am I on? Hi. Hi. I have some notes. Where's my clicker? Thank you. I have a clicker. I'm trying really hard to get better at the first couple minutes of these, and someone just suggested, these chairs are terrifying, that I tell a joke. And I've made up one joke in my life, and I made it up about 18 years ago. And the joke is, and it's actually very appropriate to this environment, because the joke is, what do you call a naked pirate in a room covered in felt with a wolf? And the answer is conceptual art. That's right. All right. I told you I don't do that sort of stuff when I open the speeches very often. I'm never doing that again. Shit. That's me, thinner. I'm going to talk about talent. There we go. That's the title of the talk. It actually is the title of the talk. There's nothing more to it. We're done. So I have dealt with talent. I mean, what am I saying? I'm talking. I've never given this talk before. It's all completely new. I have dealt with talent in the form of working with writers and engineers and designers and product managers and leadership and sales. So those are kinds of talent I have direct experience of. And, but I've also heard people talk about other kinds of talents: painting, academia, the sciences, sculpture, photography, conceptual art, music, dance, theater, athletics, video games. We talk a lot about talent in our world. It's a big subject that people bring up constantly. So I was like, what the hell is it? Because everyone's like, we need to hire talent. Talent makes all the difference. If you're going to build your business, you need to find very talented people. And I'm one of those people who needs a kind of framework for everything, or I get really confused. So I went to the Oxford Unabridged English Dictionary, and it has, talent is the power or ability of mind or body viewed as something divinely entrusted. So already we're in a bad territory where God is involved, so we're screwed in trying to figure out what's to a person for use and improvement, considered either as one organic whole or as consisting of a number of distinct faculties. Okay, so that, not super helpful, but also spiritual. Then there's this definition. This is the Malcolm Gladwell definition, the 10,000 hours. If you do something for 10,000 hours, you'll become very skilled at it. Scientists have taken issue with this definition. But the thing about it, I'm like, okay, fine, you do something for 10,000 hours, that makes sense. I can see actually developing a talent over 10,000 hours. But the issue is, what in God's name would inspire a person to spend 10,000 hours on anything, and why would that be good? We don't ask that question. It's like, hey, he took 10,000 hours and became a great designer. But what broken individual is going to spend 5 years of working time, just sort of doodling around to get to that point of skill where we go, whew, that man or woman is talented. So why? Why the 10,000 hours? And then I went out and I looked for talent on the internet, and it's amazing how people represent it. You see a lot of charts like this where it's like, talent will yield 46 million pounds in better sales, and the talent crunch is really bad around technicians. And then this chart, this shows up. This is the 9-square performance versus potential talent chart. This is everywhere on the internet. Notice in the middle, that's a person who needs to develop. Or a solid citizen. Same chart, but now it has 81 squares. I don't know why they're there. Another solid citizen. Key player in the middle. Up on the top, you have a consistent star. That's very nice. On the left, rough diamond, and on the bottom, talent risk. I like on the top left here, enigma. It's all the exact same chart. High potential, low performance, enigma, but core employee in the middle and future leader on the top. Now, I'm an advisor to Medium, which means I get to make fun of it. The next place I went and looked for ideas about talent was Medium. I'm like, God, if there's going to be one publishing platform that's going to have like way too many articles about what this is and what people think. And indeed, you go there and you find that there are lots of pictures of people looking at clouds being talented, and there is this kid with the violin, you're going to see that, and how it's about learning. And there's that guy, he's doing that, and that's talent versus passion. There's talent versus genius, talent versus inspiration, and then there's also a big sort of anti-talent move where people are talking about work and how it's all about work and how work is better than talent. These get a lot of recommendations. People really like that message that talent doesn't matter. And then there's 10 lessons pop music can teach you, and I'm just going to let this go for a minute because I want you to have the experience that I had, but compress. Talent, there must be 1,000 or more articles about talent on Medium. This is something that our culture, in particular, feels is very, very important to write about, talk about. Talent is a big message. Oh yeah, the hand holding the tree, that's a big one, that happens. Then, okay, so you've all seen those. You know the kind of discussion that people have around talent out in the big world. Then I went and looked. It's my favorite form of communication is squares with words in them. And this is going to scroll for about 60 seconds, but you'll see it's like, the messages are like, ideas rule the world, do it with passion or not at all, hard work beats talent over and over again. So this is the pop culture concept of talent. And there's God in here again, just like in the OED. You're going to find God in lots of these and about God-given talents. But it's either one of those. It's either God gave you something and you'd better use it, or it doesn't matter and it's all about hard work. Just enjoy it. This is reality, man. We're doing nice things with grid systems here, but this is the world. This is what people are reading and thinking about these big subjects, right? Isn't ease out nice? There we go. Talent or hard work. Anyway, talent is God-given, product of 10,000 hours. It relates to human capital. It's less than genius. It's less than hard work. It's learned. It's related to brain chemistry. That's a big subject. It's often tragically wasted, and there's sort of mute, inglorious Miltons out in the world who we should be finding and elevating. And in particular, there was one book I read which related talent to the issue of maternal narcissism, that if your mother was needed your constant attention, you developed talent. So very Freudian in 60s. So that's out there. Quick reading from a book in progress related to the subject. Here is a trick I have learned about managing projects. I've shared it with other managers, and they've reported back that it works just fine. Let's say you are working with a graphic designer, a good one, a talented one, and you need them to make something for you, like a web page or a graphic for a web page. And I'm sorry, the designer says, it's just going to be late. I have other projects. I have other responsibilities. It's complicated. There are exigencies. My cat died. I can't focus. My children and my health condition. You can't force this. There's a research phase, and I'm waiting to hear back from the photographer. I need the real copy. I need the branding guide. They changed Photoshop. I'm waiting for some books to arrive. The grid system is off. We need to consider how this is going to work on mobile. My wife has the flu. Purple's wrong. I'm waiting for Time Warner to fix the cable modem. I thought I'd be able to work in an open plan office. I can't. There's a lot of noise, and the light has a reddish tint, and my headphones sound tinny in one ear, and it's throwing me off, and my chair has a leftward tilt, and all of my designs are trending leftwards, and my fiance has rickets, and my marriage is failing, and I should never have said yes to this, because I should have known that I would create only more emptiness and vacuum in the world, for I am history's worst monster. I am the reason that nothing is good. I have created only failure everywhere I go. I am a machine that eats Pocky and excretes despair, but if I could have another week, I'll get it for you. So if you're that manager and this is the person you're working with, open up the lousiest program you have, PowerPoint, great example, and don't think much. Just do the design for the designer. Do it without any shame and do the best you can. That's critical. And email it over with these words. I know you're under a lot of pressure, but if you could just give me a few minutes of feedback, I'll do my best to get this done. And that will generate the desired effect. The designer will immediately switch from a state of total despair and shame into one of complete panicked revulsion and nausea, for which the only possible cure is to take the horrible atrocity, the offense to taste and form that you produced, and sit down huffing and do the work that you asked her to do 45 days ago in about 6 hours. At the end of which, she'll experience a state of calm, rapture, and a kind of amnesia. The entire span of time during which things where nothing was getting done will suddenly be chalked up to process. And you've solved two problems. You got the work done so that you can move forward with your own responsibilities, and you gave a talented person a sense of superiority. That's the nature of it. One sits around terrified to get started for fear of failing until the risk that someone else will do the work incorrectly sends them into such a state of frustration, annoyance, and jealousy that it gets done. And have you ever watched the talented? The way that when they're nervous, the hands move over and over, and they shake, and it's like as if energy was leaking out of somebody's body. And they flex their hips in the chair, and the right or left foot starts twisting in circles, and the extremities each take their turn, inscribing little shapes in the air. And then there comes that nervous click of the pen against the teeth, or the little rattlesnake noises people make, like, and the exhaled sigh that it does this sort of, and the round lip staccato exhales, which are sort of, and then there's this sort of growling, that goes down about a quarter octave. There's a glissando there, and the eyes narrow, and it culminates in this sort of sweep of hair from the forehead, and while the keyboard remains untouched and the screen is blank, and the mouse sits in its imaginary two-dimensional plane, unmoved and unclicked, and then the process repeats, tension mounting, until finally, minutes, weeks, or horrible years later, ask me about my book deadline. The body becomes so desperate to fill the blankness, to turn the cruel and empty face of the screen into something less recriminating, that even the fear of failure is forgotten for long enough to work. So that, hold on. The end is written, this talk is written in number 3 pencil there. I need to come back to it. So that's a little essay I'm working on the state of talent. I have to do a quick digression into the issue of form, because I like to I like to focus. We all know what form is: letter paper, tabloid paper, and if many of you, some of you might be too young to have ever experienced paper directly, but for the rest of us, you work backwards from these sizes. You learn in school that things fill a certain amount of paper, and those rectangles are very meaningful in our world. Another form that I love is the form of the apple pie. And notice this is in Comic Sans, and you guys might find it horrifying, but to them, this is serious stuff. And it's ingredients on how to make an apple pie. And I encourage everyone to do this Google search. People are out there searching for the platonic apple pie. Here's a hipster apple pie contest, but the rules are just as intense as the last one. And I love this question. They have an FAQ. Are nuts allowed? Yeah, all right, okay. And then how about bacon? And you can just hear them going like, oh, as long as Apple is the main player, yeah. Because it's just the internet got involved, right? And it was just like, and they published these rules. 10% appearance, 40% crust and filling, 50% overall flavor and taste, right? So think about that. Think about how arbitrary and insane that is. But this is what the judges are going to be looking at. So the form of an apple pie is this shared cultural assumption. And it goes back, here's a recipe from 1381. To make tardis and apples, take good apples and good spices and figs and raisins and pears, and when they are well brayed, colored with saffron well, and do it in a coffin and do it forth to bake well. So that's the idea of the apple pie has been around forever. And the next slide is a slide that I have this in every talk because I live by this quote: you can't have art without resistance in the materials. You need those rules. You need the constraints in order to make sense. It's the great British polymath, William Morris, who was publisher, architect, everything. And that's a wonderful example to me of resistance in the materials, right? You give someone a cup of coffee. I mean, I'm sorry to call it coffee, but And you'll notice on the top right, there's a sort of like printed output on the latte, like the digital got involved. But this is art working with resistance to the materials, and of course photography is elevating this. It's not, these are, I'm sure you can drink the one with the cat leaping across the two cups, but at a certain level it's gotten to a point where it's a little more representational. This is Martha Graham, and she said, so speaking about resistance to the material for her is, her body is a dancer, and time. No artist is pleased. There is no satisfaction whatever at any time. There is only a queer, divine dissatisfaction, a blessed unrest that keeps us marching and makes us more alive than the others. For the first couple of years, this is Hourglass, you make stuff, it's just not that good. It's trying to be good. But it has potential, but it's not. But your taste, a nice positive word, taste, the thing that got you into the game is still killer, and your taste is why your work disappoints you. A lot of people never get past this phase. They quit. Most people who do, I know, who do interesting creative work went through years of this. We know our work doesn't have this special thing that we want it to have. So what I would argue these people are saying is that talent is exercised when an individual perceives an error of form and acts to correct it. When the radio show isn't right, when the choreography is off, when the latte looks weird. You keep going back and you keep going back, sometimes for years. And a simpler way to say that is to say, oops, I actually didn't intend that. Talent is what annoys you. And I think that that's real, and I think that as I work with talented people across all sorts of things, it's not a positive definition necessarily, but it's real. When I know talented people, even if they're positive and happy and outgoing, there are times when their hands are moving really fast and they are really shaky trying to get that thing done, not just because of deadlines, but because the form feels off and because it feels wrong. It's a negative stimulus, and they have to keep going back to it. And engineers are a good example, designers are a good example, on and on. Transitions, I'm sorry. So, there are all these guides out in the world about managing your annoyance and how to do things, how to create these forms and work with these structures, how to write a movie, how to write a book this weekend, how to read a book, how to paint like the old masters, how to make programs, dealing with white space, journalistic writing, the manual of style, the elements of style, typographic style, journalism. Then there's things like this, which I'm assuming you guys recognize. It's Twitter. And it stops you at 140 characters and says that's enough. They've built the resistance into the materials into it, and they've done it at such a small scale that we will all sort of, like they built the annoyance into the product. It turns red and it says, you're done. And one of the things I think about a lot is that San Francisco makes these boxes, and New York City fills them in. That there's these different cultures around product and making things. That out there at Twitter, they're making this 1 billion times. And here, and it's also where our CMSs come from. And this is where a lot of the tools that we use to make culture are coming out of the sort of larger digital culture. And then we're using them here in New York City, but not necessarily building them. And so I wonder why. Oh, and I also just like to throw these in because forms become so intense to us that we put them on our bodies. And I think assume we're original when we do it. I love that because especially now that there's Creative Cloud, it's got to feel weird, but but like you get so enamored and so involved with your tools that you really start to live through them. So, how am I on time? How long do I have? 10 minutes? 5 minutes? 10, okay. Thank you. Well, I don't want to, I'm going to talk about networks very quickly and how they relate to talent. This part's going to be like, I'm not making it easy right now, just so you know. Like, I'm not tying this up with a bow because I trust you, for real. So, I'm fascinated by vaudeville. Vaudeville was a form of popular entertainment in America where people would learn to juggle or do monologues or do dances. There is a typical vaudeville performance. There is another one. There is another one. A clown with a dog. People singing. People giving talks. People people making, doing tricks with donkeys, and as well as famous actors and short plays and early forms of comedy. And the way the vaudeville worked was you had these very, very talented people, and they would go from theater to theater. And I started to ask myself, why did this come into existence in America? Well, the first thing you had were cities. You had obvious locations, and I just chose these at random. And then you also had a media. You had media, you had newspapers, you had a way to communicate inside of the cities. And you also had sort of popular forms of entertainment. People knew how to juggle, and they would juggle for their friends, things like that. And so then comes the railways, connecting these places, and then came the telegraph. And now you really have enough of a system that you could have and form a popular entertainment like vaudeville, where someone starts in New York City and goes to Chicago, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and Austin. They perform, they make money. And the key thing is that they provide novelty, right? Like, you can only do the show a certain number of times in New York City and everybody gets worn out on it. But if you travel, you can keep it going. And that way you can build a career. So you're turning your talent, your juggling act, or your funny jokes into a career. And so then you add in the telephone network, and then the theaters start getting built. And there are manuals. You can go out and find manuals on archive.org of how to build a vaudeville theater, because people wanted to get into this business, and there were these performers, these talented performers, who could come to your town with their big trunk on the railway, and they would tell you they were coming via the telegraph, and they could even sort of book themselves. So if you had a theater, you could bring entertainers in, and you could bundle them all up into an act. It's actually, the best of the lot would be continuous vaudeville, where you would do a 5-hour show. It might have like 20 acts in it, and it would start over after 5 hours. A person could come in, they could sit down, they could watch, and they could chill for a while, and then they could leave kind of whenever they wanted, and then the show would loop. And so that was continuous vaudeville. And then suddenly, these circuits started to emerge. The theater started to consolidate. And some of the names are familiar and some of them aren't. There was Pantages and Albies. That's Edward Albee's father was the person who created Albies. But there was also Loews, which you still know from the movie theaters. And what that meant was that these networks of theaters owned different theaters and were connected to and sort of franchise theaters around the country. And so there was a form of consolidation and centralization. And then there were bookers. The guy there with the eyeglasses is a booker. But that was literally the guy where you'd go and you'd say, here's my juggling act. And he would go, kid, I'm putting you on the road. The aristocrats, that kind of stuff. Like, that was real. And these guys, all of these systems start to emerge to kind of manage the network of talent. All these people are running around the country doing their juggling and dog acts. And people are figuring out how to get in the middle of that and enhance it and make a little money off of it and reduce the risk, so that suddenly, if you go to a Lowe's, the booker can telegraph the Lowe's head office and say, I got a really great act, and Lowe's can say, great, we'll send them on our circuit, and they'll go to 20 different cities. And that way you could build a career. And the theater chain started to enforce rules. They started to enforce no swearing rules, and things got very cleaned up and very buttoned up. The trade-off for the talent is you could get much more famous as this got bigger. You weren't just kind of a low-key act. You could get nationally famous. And in fact, the best thing to do was to go to New York City and play at the Palace Theater, and that was the big time. That's where that phrase comes from. If you played at the Palace, you'd made the big time. And so it gets more complicated and more complicated, and then at a certain point, in the late 1800s, particularly early 1900s, this whole network exists, and then movies come into existence, films. And suddenly, they start to move the films along the exact same axis. They go out on the railway, and they go to the theaters, and initially they're used to close the show. Movies are just literally like, here's a train coming down, or here's somebody here's like people dancing. And that was all they were, these short scenes. Nobody really knew what to do with the technology, but then they started to add narrative to them, and they started to replace the vaudevillians. And the same thing happened with radio, where radio networks started to come up. Suddenly, you didn't need all these forms of transportation, and you could even start to do things nationally. They needed talent, so they started to absorb the vaudeville talent. And so suddenly, you've got vaudevillians, some of whom are good for film, some of whom are good for radio. Television crops up, and that starts to absorb even more people. And it's all built on top of this early network. There's a very direct lineal relationship between people juggling and walking dogs, and or teaching, having dogs do tricks, and radio and television, where the talent came from. And the actors and the stars are all the same. Like Jack Benny starts in vaudeville, goes to radio, goes to television. Fred Allen, there's all these names who are sort of the forebears of all of the entertainment that we have today. And then, so literally up until the kind of the beginning of our lives, this was the state. And then suddenly this thing happened. And now the network kind of looks like this instead. It's like users content, like that old network went away in some bizarre way, right? But it's still there. Like the TV networks are still there, the radio networks are still there, but suddenly we're out there telling this story about content creators and users and Facebook and Google, and everything's going to be great, and this is the model that's going to work. And this is all sort of built on top of that, right? There's Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google, and we're giving them the content, or you the content, and you're giving us the money. And it's all supposed to be really simple. This is supposed to be this incredible simplification of that old shitty network where people were just profiting off of talent, and talent was going to flourish. And this is the world I came of age in. Like, I wrote on the internet, and I watched as every new business model for writers showed up and was supposed to solve all the problems and didn't. And I could never figure out why. And I was always puzzled, like, why didn't it look like this? Because instead, what it really looks like when you're out there and working is it looks like this. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this thing, but this is the web marketing landscape, right? And this is what you need to make your content work online. Each one of those is a company. That's the network that actually replaced that old network that I had drawn, not the really easy one where the content's coming back and forth. And this is a set of constraints that's very important and probably very familiar to everyone. These are all the IAB-specific ad units. We're all kind of working with and against these as we do our jobs on the internet. There's kind of no way around it. You're either rejecting them or blocking them or trying to make them work, or trying to figure out replacements for them, or creating content that can be made profitable if you can figure out what to do with them. And I've started to see the things that we're doing now, and I told you I wouldn't make this easy, it's abstract, that this is a kind of replacement. Conferences, the kind of environment we're in now is almost another kind of vaudeville. Like, there are probably 20 conferences going on today, and there are speakers bouncing around between them. And you guys are all in here because you have a specific set of talents, and you want something from this event, and people want something from you. And there's a larger, sort of weirder network around us. And I feel increasingly as I go through my life and I think about the talents that I have and the relationships I want to build, that I want to know where I am inside of these networks. So that there were old networks that had been replaced and bootstrapped, that you have something like vaudeville and you end up with radio, and now we've got the whole web, and we've rebuilt television and radio and community and entertainment on top of those old weird networks, or on top of the web, on top of new networks. And that's sort of where I'm at. It's a puzzle. We've got all these people who are vaguely annoyed by different forms of communication, and we have what are supposed to be a few kinds of communication, but are actually thousands and thousands of different companies all interacting. We've got this world of conferences. We have these new networks that rise up, like things like GitHub, which is an amazing way to capitalize on how engineers work, and things like Dribbble and so on, like these networks that are actually in response to and in reaction to people's relationship with their own talent. And as I think these things through, I think about how to apply what I've told you. And in terms of hiring, because I hire people now, I sort of have done away with the whiteboard, and I've started to just ask people who come to me, what bugs you the most? And those answers have been kind of wonderful. One person told me yesterday that what bothers them the most is watching users do things manually that could be done by computer. And I'm like, oh, well, then we can probably work together in a way that looking at their portfolio wouldn't have told me. Knowing that they're frustrated by those sorts of things, that their talent is going to align with that kind of annoyance. And it's all given me a kind of a new empathy for myself. I'm realizing that my relationship with the forums in which I work is not always healthy. That when I freak out over a piece of writing, or when I freak out over a website or an object that I'm working on, that's not right sometimes. I need to chill the hell out. And that I've indulged that in myself, sometimes for 20 years, and to my detriment, and to the detriment of people around me. And that I need to manage my annoyance. Number 3 pencil is a bad way to close out a talk. And I've been finding myself teaching people more and more, thinking about talent as a form of annoyance rather than a positive thing, that it's actually okay at the same time trying to manage my annoyance, there's a sort of annoyance I want to allow people to express, people who haven't felt that they were free to, that they weren't free to be critical or weren't free to be angry about things. And I'm letting that, I want to talk to people as I live my life and tell them that it's okay to be upset about shitty work in a very serious way. It's okay to be angry about the web, and it's okay to be angry about the way things are going. And that's really it. I told you, I'm leaving this one open. I'm learning to know my network and know where I am. I'm learning that people are often really annoyed who seem really talented. And I'm learning that it's okay to be that frustrated. And I hope that you guys can go out in the world and be annoyed and frustrated yourselves. Thank you.